Don't forget the smell of a kitchen you built yourself. Mine smelled like cedar and coffee and something underneath that I could never name, maybe just time, the particular weight of years that soak into the walls of a place you've made with your own hands. The bakery on Millbrook Avenue in Knoxville, Tennessee, had been mine for 19 years. 19 years of 4 a.m. alarm clocks and flour on my forearms and a little bell above the door that rang every time someone walked in, looking for something warm. My husband Gerald used to say I baked like I was trying to feed a city. He wasn't wrong. After he passed cardiac arrest, February of 2011, a Tuesday, the kind of cold that makes the air feel solid, I didn't know what else to do but go to work. You get up, you turn on the oven, you make the biscuits. That's the only thing that made sense to me in those first months, so that's what I did. The bakery was already ours by then, 8 years in. Gerald had done the books. I had done everything else. After he was gone, I learned the books too. I had to. My daughter was in college in Charlotte, and my son was doing God knows what in Phoenix. And it was just me and the mixer and the morning regulars who came in before the rest of the world woke up. Those people saved me. I don't say that lightly. By 2019, I had paid off the building. The actual building, not just the lease. I had bought it in 2014 when the previous owner retired and offered me first right of purchase. I signed the papers on a Thursday and cried in my car afterward because Gerald would have been so proud. I kept the little plastic pen they gave me at the title company. It's in my kitchen junk drawer right now. My daughter's name is Annette. She's 41 now. She married a man named Dwight 6 years ago, a salesman. Very handsome, very sure of himself. I tried to like Dwight. I did like certain things about him, early on. He was good at parties. He remembered people's names. He always complimented my food, which I now understand was calculated, but at the time I appreciated it. When Annette told me she wanted to move back to Knoxville from Charlotte, I was genuinely happy. She'd worked in marketing for years and said she was tired of the corporate world. She had an idea. She wanted to open a cafe attached to the bakery, something with lighter fare and cocktails in the evening, expand the whole footprint. I listened. I asked questions. We sat at my kitchen table until almost midnight talking about it. I should have been more careful about what I agreed to. The first change was small. Dwight suggested we get a point-of-sale system to replace my old register. That was reasonable. Fine. Then he suggested we hire his nephew to manage the system, which felt a little less reasonable, but I told myself family helping family wasn't the worst thing. Then Annette started coming in on days I wasn't there. She had a key. She'd always had a key. I never thought twice about that. And rearranging the display cases. She said it was for better visual flow. I moved things back the next morning without saying anything. That went on for 2 weeks. Then came the conversation about the signage. Dwight had a friend who did branding, and this friend had apparently been retained, without asking me, to develop a new logo and exterior sign for the bakery. Annette told me about this on a Sunday afternoon in my own living room, very casually, the way you'd mention you switch shampoos. I stared at her for a long moment. The sign says Hattie's, I said. I know, Mom, but we're thinking about rebranding as Millbrook & Co., so it sounds more like a destination. Hattie's is cute, but it doesn't scale. I had named the bakery after my mother. Her name was Harriet, and everyone called her Hattie, and she had passed away 3 months before we opened. Gerald hung that sign himself on a Saturday morning in May with a borrowed ladder and a level he kept checking even though the sign looked perfectly straight to everyone watching. I told Annette no, clearly and directly, the way I should have done with everything. I said the name stays. She nodded and said of course she understood. They'd go back to the drawing board. I thought that was the end of it. 2 weeks later, I came in on a Monday morning and the sign was gone. There was a paper banner in the window that said Millbrook & Co. Grand refreshed opening coming soon. I stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and looked at that banner for a long time, long enough that Carolyn, one of my bakers who'd been with me for 11 years, came outside and stood next to me and didn't say a word. She just stood there. That told me she'd known it was happening. It told me she hadn't known what to do. I went inside. I called Annette. She didn't answer. I called Dwight. He answered on the third ring with the particular voice of a man who has been waiting to answer, rehearsed and calm. "We talked about this, Hattie," he said. "We talked about me saying no," I said. "That's what we talked about. Annette thought you'd come around once you saw the vision." I hung up. That was the first time I'd hung up on anyone since I was 19 years old, and my mother told me something I didn't want to hear. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. I want to tell you that I marched back out there and ripped that banner down myself. I want to tell you I was that decisive in that moment, but the truth is, I went to my office in the back, the little room with the desk and the photo of Gerald on the wall, and the smell of yeast coming through the vents, and I sat down and I cried. Not because I was helpless, because I was tired. 19 years of tired. And because my daughter, my firstborn, the person I had hauled myself out of grief to build something for, she had looked at the thing I built and decided her husband's opinion mattered more than my name on the door. You understand that kind of tired. Some of you do. The banner came down the next day, not because of me. Carolyn and two of the other longtime staff had apparently had a conversation of their own and decided that no one had the authority to put it up in the first place. I found out about that weeks later, and I still get a lump in my throat thinking about it. But the damage was happening underneath the surface where banners couldn't show it. Dwight had been in communication with my wholesale bread supplier, presenting himself as a managing partner. I found this out when the supplier's rep called me to confirm a contract renegotiation I knew nothing about. He'd also contacted my landlord. I leased the small parking lot behind the building from a separate owner to discuss future expansion plans. The landlord called me confused, asking if I wanted to triple the lot lease. I started keeping notes, dates, calls, conversations. I have a notebook I bought at the dollar store, purple cover, college ruled, and I wrote down everything with the time and who was involved. My mother always said, if it matters, write it down. She was a woman who'd lived through things where paperwork was the difference between what was yours and what was taken. I inherited that habit. What I hadn't expected was the meeting. In January, Annette called and asked if we could sit down as a family to discuss the business going forward. She used that phrase, going forward, the way people do when they've been coached. When I arrived at her house, there were printed documents on the table. An actual presentation. Dwight had made slides on his laptop. The proposal was this. I would transition to a founding partner emeritus role. I would retain a percentage of profits, but step back from daily operations. Annette and Dwight would assume management. The restructured entity would be called, there it was in the slides, in a nice clean font, Millbrook & Co. I looked at those slides. I looked at my daughter, who was looking at the table. I looked at Dwight, who was looking at me the way someone looks at a problem they've already solved in their head. I own the building, I said. We'd work out a lease arrangement. I own the building, I said again. I own the equipment. I own the recipes. My name is on every business license, every health permit, every wholesale account. I am not a founding partner emeritus. I am the owner, and this meeting is over. I picked up my purse. I left. My hands were shaking by the time I got to my car, but I didn't let them see that. That night, I called an attorney. Her name is Patricia. Not someone I'm inventing. A real woman I went to church with for 20 years, sharp as a tack and allergic to nonsense. She told me several things I needed to hear. She told me my position was legally strong because I had never signed anything giving Dwight authority to act on my behalf. She told me to document everything I already had, which I was already doing, and she told me to consider my options carefully because options were exactly what I had. I spent 6 weeks considering. What I arrived at was this. I was 67 years old. I had built something beautiful, and it had cost me 19 years of 4 a.m. mornings and one good husband's partnership and the better part of my knees. I did not want to spend the next chapter of my life in a legal war with my own daughter. I also did not want to spend it watching Dwight call himself a managing partner in a building I paid for with Gerald's life insurance and 30 years of my own labor. So I made a decision, and I made it alone without asking anyone's permission, without announcing it in advance, without giving anyone the chance to talk me out of it. I sold the building and the business. Not to Annette and Dwight. To the Okafor family, who had owned the Vietnamese restaurant 3 storefronts down from me for 12 years. Bianca Okafor had stopped in for coffee nearly every week since she opened, and we had talked many times about her wanting to expand. I called her on a Thursday morning in March. We met for lunch. By the end of February, the following month, the papers were signed. I also sold her the wholesale accounts, the equipment, and the customer list. What I did not sell were my recipes. Those are mine. They are in a binder in my home, and they belong to no one else. The Okafors kept Carolyn and most of the staff. That was a condition I asked for. Bianca agreed without hesitation. The sign now says Millbrook Bakehouse, a compromise I found I could live with. The bell above the door is the same one Gerald hung. I did not tell Annette until the week before closing. I want to be precise about that moment. I called her on a Wednesday evening. I told her the bakery had been sold, that the sale would close the following Tuesday, and that I wanted her to know before it became public record. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, how could you do that?" It wasn't a question. It was the thing people say when they mean, "How dare you?" when they mean that was supposed to be mine. And that's the sentence that told me everything I needed to know about how she had understood this situation all along. I said, the bakery was mine to do with as I chose. I chose. She hung up. Dwight sent me a long email the following morning. I read it once, responded with the name and contact information of my attorney, and deleted it. My attorney has not heard from him since. I know some of you are going to say I should have handled it differently. You're going to say I should have put my foot down earlier, that I should have filed a cease and desist the moment that banner went up, that I should have changed the locks on the building, and I hear you. I've heard that voice in my own head 100 times. But the truth is, some situations you have to live through in the order they arrive. I was trying not to lose my daughter and my business at the same time. In the end, I lost the business I'd planned to lose anyway, and I kept the one that mattered. Annette and I have not spoken in 5 months. That is its own kind of grief, different from the grief of losing Gerald, different from the grief of losing my mother, but a grief that sits in the same room. Some nights I set 2 cups of coffee out of habit, and then I remember. What I have now is this, a house that is fully mine, with no encumbrances and no one else's name on it. I have a checking account that my attorney and my accountant both reviewed before the sale closed to make sure the proceeds were structured correctly. I updated my will in February. My stake goes to the people I choose, and it is nobody else's business who those people are. Last month, 3 women from my church, Dolores, who is 72, May, who is 69 and has a laugh that could rattle windows, and Beverly, who insists she's 65 but we all know better, invited me to join them on a road trip to Savannah. I said yes before they finished asking. We drove down on a Friday and stayed in a house May rented near the water, and we ate at places chosen entirely based on what smelled good when we walked past. We stayed up until 2 in the morning on the porch with sweet tea and told each other things we'd been carrying for years. I baked on the last morning. I brought a pound of my own flour because I knew I would want to. I made biscuits in a stranger's kitchen while the sun came up over the water, and the other women wandered in one by one in their robes, and Dolores put on Aretha Franklin. And May said, "Hattie, I don't know how you make them taste like that." And I didn't answer because the answer is 19 years, and I didn't want to get into it before coffee. But I thought about Gerald. I thought about that building on Millbrook Avenue. I thought about the sign he hung and the pen from the title company and the purple notebook I filled up with dates and names and things I was not going to let anyone take from me. And I thought, I didn't lose that bakery. I released it. There's a difference, and I know it now, the way I know it when bread is done. Not by the timer, but by the smell. You just know. That's the thing nobody tells you about being a woman of a certain age who has outlasted her grief and outlasted someone else's entitlement and still has her recipes and her name and her own front door. Nobody tells you it's going to feel like this. It feels like a window opened. I keep the purple notebook in my nightstand drawer now, not because I need it anymore. The sale closed. The lawyer has the paperwork. The building belongs to someone else. But because it reminds me of something I almost forgot while I was in the middle of everything. It reminds me that I knew. I knew what was happening long before I admitted it to myself, and the knowing was the first act of getting free. There's a cause and effect to how things like this unfold, and I've had enough months now to see it clearly. Dwight didn't walk into my bakery and take it in a single afternoon. It started with a point-of-sale system, then a nephew, then rearranged display cases, then a sign with someone else's name on it. Every step was small enough to explain away, and I explained it away because I loved my daughter and I wanted to believe that love was being returned in kind. That's not weakness. That's what love does. It gives the benefit of the doubt, past the point where doubt should have run out. But there's a version of that generosity that becomes its own kind of harm to yourself and to the people you keep excusing. When I stopped excusing and started writing things down in that notebook, I wasn't being cold. I was finally being honest. What I understand now is that integrity isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's the thing you hold on to when you're sitting alone in a back office that smells like yeast, deciding whether you're going to be the woman you always told yourself you were. I had built something with my hands and my husband's memory and 19 years of 4 a.m. alarms. I had a responsibility to that, to Gerald, yes, but more than that, to myself, to the version of me that signed those papers at the title company and cried in the parking lot because she had done something real. I owed her the truth about what was happening, and I owed her the clarity to act on it. The hardest part wasn't selling. The hardest part was thinking clearly when everything in me wanted to go soft. When Annette sat at that table with Dwight's printed slides and his clean fonts and his rehearsed calm, I could feel the pull to negotiate, to compromise, to find some middle ground that would let us all leave the room without it being what it was. I had to use every bit of clear-headedness I had to see the situation as it actually stood, legally, financially, practically, and not as I wished it stood. That's the thing about being a woman in a room where someone has decided you're already on your way out. You have to be smarter than your own grief in that moment. You have to do the math while your heart is still catching up. And then you have to move, not in anger, not in reaction, deliberately, with full knowledge of what you're choosing and why. Selling to the Okafors wasn't an impulse. It was 6 weeks of thinking, 2 conversations with my attorney, 1 long night with the legal pad, and a decision made in complete stillness. That's the only kind of decision that holds, the ones made in stillness. I think about Carolyn standing on that sidewalk next to me in November, not saying a word. That was its own kind of courage, a different shape than mine, but the same root. We both knew what we were looking at. We both stayed standing. The window that opened after all of this, I'm still learning what's on the other side of it. Savannah was part of it. May's laugh was part of it. Biscuits in a stranger's kitchen at sunrise while Aretha played was part of it. The rest I'll find out when I get there.